Welcome to another edition of the Daily Night. I am your host, Brian Smith, and I'm also the publisher at Inside the Nights on Fan Nation, powered by Sports Illustrated. Today, I'm going to give a very unique perspective on recruiting from historical perspective, with UCF being the end goal. I'm going to use other programs that I've studied over the last 2 decades and give an example of what can and cannot work for UCF, even if they're just implemented in small sections. Recruiting is complex, and there are a lot of different aspects of it, so let's get to it. Here's the first thing to think about. UCF is in Orlando. You're going to recruit Florida. Doesn't change. Just want to throw that out there. This is not going to be about recruiting the state of Florida. This is holistic, but keep that in mind. Never changes. Gus Malzahn, his staff, they get that. They've done a tremendous job of recruiting the state of Florida, the high school players to date. Good. But there are certain aspects of it that are subpoints that need to be identified. Here's what I mean. There are developmental recruits, and then there are impact recruits. Those two categories are the basics. There's some subpoints within that as well, but let's just stick to that for today. Impact guys, there's no need to really discuss it. They come in, they're dudes, they play right away. You want as many as you can. That's fine. The point here, you need to have supplemental recruits, which is what UCF has done traditionally, even before they became a Division I program. And they've done it since, and they've built, and now they've created a program that will reach the Big 12 level in 2 years. It's fantastic. That's the good news. They need to up the level with a few more of the big-time players, but they still have an opportunity, especially being here in Florida, to get developmental players at positions where other schools do not. And here's point number one with that. Historically, West Virginia recruits the state of Florida very hard. Why? There's a lot of talent here, and in the state of West Virginia, there's not. Especially at corner and DN, two premium positions. The Mountaineers just can't get them in state. They have no chance. They take junior college kids. They take kids, quite frankly, they don't always have the best backgrounds at those premium positions because those are their options. UCF has a much higher ceiling than West Virginia. Nothing against the Mountaineers and their rabid fan base. They are crazy about the Mountaineers. That's great. It just doesn't do well recruiting-wise because of the location of the institution itself. Very few prospects in that state, and recruiting premium positions across the board out of state is hard, very hard, because the competition level is raised. UCF, on the other hand, they can go within 100 miles of campus and complete a 20 to 25-man high school class and be in the top 20 every year once they're established in the Big 12. It's a few years down the road, I get that. Say 5 years from now, that's realistic. Miami did it, Florida's done it, etc. And you can do that being in the Big 12. I'm telling people now, there's going to be a major uptick with UCF football recruiting in 2 or 3 years. Actually saying you're in the Big 12 and actually being in the Big 12 are not the same. You can only project it so much. Kids want to see it. Once they're on TV and they're on the primetime games, etc., Big 12, ESPN, not ESPN Plus, etc., it will just create a totally different level. Before that, though, that's what this podcast is about. You still have to find those kids at corner, those kids at D-end, middle linebacker to a certain degree. Cameron Moore is a great example that can gain some weight. They might have to redshirt, but they have speed. They want to make a name for themselves. The Florida kids, you kind of have to be on the field to understand it completely. They want to prove something. That's one of the reasons these kids are so good. Once they get to the college level, they fear nothing, and they're coming right at you downhill. That's their mentality. And on top of that, there's just so many good athletes. There's a little bit of everything for any program that comes down here. 37 kids just got drafted into the NFL out of the state of Florida. We have players, number one in the country, by the way. With that, where else can UCF learn from? I just mentioned West Virginia. They get skill guys here. Iowa, a program that's obviously doing quite well right now, they're starting to dip into Florida a little bit. They just got a kid that I know pretty well, Jazzy and Patterson from Deerfield Beach down in the Fort Lauderdale area. That kid is a thumper, big-time running back, and he is a one-cut-and-go guy. He fits what Iowa does. Good for the Hawkeyes. There's plenty of players like that in the state of Florida. UCF is doing a good job of recruiting them, And they're going after a lot of different guys like that. Now they need to finish it in this class and moving forward. But it still comes back to those premium positions. I just use Jazzy as an example. Iowa recruits here. Indiana recruits here. Some of those teams, they're going to have to beat out for kids that may not start game one. Like, Jalen Robinson, if he'd have signed with UCF instead of Oklahoma out of high school, pretty good chance he'd have started his freshman year. Just immense talent. Jazzy and Patterson might not, but he could. And he's going to play at Iowa next year, flat out. Again, he's a thumper. That's the kind of player that UCF can bring in, kind of like Johnny, the running back that has really burst onto the scene. Those kinds of players. To wrap up segment one, think to yourself, well, what other programs really recruit Florida? And they may not get the kid that Alabama or Florida State or Florida whatever gets, but they can do well. And to that end, something else. From somebody who studied Florida State recruiting in the 90s through the early 2000s when they just dominated recruiting, the Seminoles made a living. Yeah, they got some five-star kids, but they made a living on the North Florida Panhandle kids that were three-star guys, or the South Georgia kid that was a three-star guy, because they were from some podunk town and they didn't get the same coverage that a kid in Tampa or Fort Lauderdale did. Were they as good? Yes. Did they get the same coverage? No. That's where your scouting comes in. So think about that. What other programs are good at doing that? Finding that gem. There are several of them. I'm going to talk about that in segment number 2. Here are the programs that historically have come down here and found some gems and just do it consistently, and they don't necessarily get fanfare for it. Obviously, West Virginia's one, I already mentioned. Indiana's doing it now because they've got staff that has a lot of history in Florida, and they've killed it. Great for them. But historically, there are a couple other schools that have just found a way to do it. Auburn's one. They're close. That's almost cheating because it's such a close school to the Florida border. But there's another one, and that's Georgia Tech. Their current quarterback, he's from Jacksonville, or at least one of their quarterbacks. They've had a little change here and there. And that's just an example. They get kids out of Miami. They get some of the private school kids. It's a really good academic school. They can't just take the same kids West Virginia does. West Virginia will take anybody with a pulse academically. They just will. Georgia Tech doesn't. That being stated, Georgia Tech will find a kid that somebody else doesn't want. They always have. That's a great example. And it's one of the schools that I track when I look at kids and I compare them. You can find out a lot about their character and their background if you just look at their offer sheet. Do they have an offer from Vandy, Duke, Notre Dame, Stanford, Rice, Virginia? These schools are not going to take idiots. A lot of schools will. Just straight up, we got to take this kid. This is what we can get. That's not those schools. Georgia Tech kind of fits that profile as well. They may take a numbskull once in a while, but it's pretty rare. UCF is in a position to do that. It's an elite school, but it's in Orlando. It's not hard to get there. Got the airport right down the road. UCF has so many advantages around Florida with these kids, and they do a great job of scouting. I trust that staff. They've done a good job to date. I like some of the offers they put out, sophomore, junior class, in addition to the class of 22, the current seniors. They're doing their own evaluations, and amen to that. Too many guys just look at the rivals list, which is stupid, and they don't really finish out recruiting the way they should. There's a lot of leg room with it. It takes forever. There's no shortcut. You have to do your own evaluations. UCF does. Good for them. And this is where they're going to change their program. Kianis Thompson, a kid that I previewed on Inside the Knights recently with his film review. Great kid, great player, premium position, defensive end. He's improved tremendously in the last, say, 6 months. Why? Like those other Florida kids, he wants to make a name for himself. Now, here's a little tip about Kianis. Many probably don't know. He's a total introvert. Great kid, but he's quiet. That's who he is. When I went to a practice in July to see him at Lakewood High School, I even brought that up with somebody who was standing over next to me. I was next to Kianis, and he acknowledged, I'm not an interview guy. It's basically conversation. We were walking away from practice, and I mentioned to him, rankings and this. And it's like, where are you ranked? That was the only time that I saw him get upset. Not like angry, but like he turned and looked at me, and the eyes for Kianis today, it was clear. I need to get my star back. I'm like, what do you mean? He said, forget which one it is, but one of the networks dropped me from a 4 to 3-star. And he was ticked. Again, this is that Florida mentality. And it doesn't make sense. Texas offered him. Alabama offered him. Miami, UCF, Florida, and oodles of others. Yet he dropped. And he's a premium position kid, good grades, and he dropped. I don't get it either. I've seen him play. I've seen him practice. I know him. He's a kid that can play at any school in the country. That's the kind of kid you make your program on. He will play next year at UCF in some capacity. How much he, engulfs himself in the playbook and all that, that'll tell the tale on how much. But he's the definition of what you need at UCF at every position. You need kids that are out to prove something. I'm going to be better than you, and here's why. Kianis Thompson, great example. And it's the kind of kid that Georgia Tech used to get, but he blew up a little more. He's at Lakeland. It's a program that everybody recruits. If you come down here, Coach Castle's a famous coach in Florida. So he gets more just due recruiting-wise, although, again, the rankings are a little skewed with him, than some of the other programs. Watch for UCF in the Panhandle, South Georgia. They're starting to be really smart about the kids they get. The Griffin kid from South Georgia, if he played in Gwinnett County, which is the most incredibly dense and talented county in the state of Georgia, and maybe the country, as far as all-around talent at every position, keywords, every position, he would be ranked a lot higher. He probably would have had a lot more offers. But he plays in Southeast Georgia. It's the middle of nowhere. He's tremendous. Do your own evaluations. That's what Iowa does. That's what West Virginia does. That's what Indiana does. That's what Georgia Tech does. Do your own evaluations. UCF is on the right path. It's just going to take a while. I know UCF fans are frustrated, and members of the media are too. At one point, they had like 5 out of their top 6 guys not in the lineup. Can't do anything about it. Injuries are the number one predictor of who wins football games. It is what it is. And it's why the NFL makes coaches, at least they tell them to, give injury reports, because that's what Vegas wants to hear. Although the NFL denies it, they're hooked into Vegas and they're getting paid. Nobody's kidding me. College football, they don't do that. So you don't know who's going to play. That's why I don't really report much about injuries. But to that end, UCF struggling. That's not going to be the case in a few years. The way recruiting's going, I have a lot of positivity in just seeing who they're going after, why they're going after them, and the kind of players they're going after, personality on and off the field. They're getting the right kind of kids. To name a couple other schools that have done well in this state, Louisville, tremendous. There's a certain quarterback that now plays for the Baltimore Ravens. It's from South Florida. Pretty good player. You might know who that is. There's also a couple of other schools that are up north that have done good. Ohio State, they used to take developmental kids, but now they're getting the elite kids. Michigan State, tremendous. Cedric Urban came out of Miami. He was pretty highly rated. Now his kid's down there. He's committed to Notre Dame. These are the kinds of things you do. You find a small school kid at a Catholic school or something. Hey, just because he's playing against average competition, you can still see their physical skill. Do your own evaluations. These schools are doing it. Mississippi State will come down here and get 1 or 2 kids. Ole Miss will. You don't have to be Alabama or Georgia to invade this state and find players. South Carolina has killed it in Jacksonville over the last 30 years, finding 1 gem a year. A kid that'll start as a sophomore. That's what UCF has to do. Now, they got to beat these schools for them because it's not going to change. They're not going to stop recruiting the state of Florida, nor should they. Heck yeah. I mean, if I'm South Carolina, I'm coming to Atlanta, Jacksonville, Orlando, Miami. Right there, they're good, and they just recruit their area and a little bit of Charlotte. They're done. You can have a top 20 class every year doing that if you're the University of South Carolina. That's who UCF's going after. Those same kids doing their own evaluations, though. They might take a 3-star kid that ends up better than the kid that's going to Florida that's a 5-star kid. This state is loaded, and that's why I like scouting here. All these schools I'm talking about, they do their evaluations. They don't look at the rivals list or the 24/7 list. They go out and they check them out. So with that, hopefully UCF is going to get some more recruiting news here pretty soon. I'm hearing some good things. I'll let the kids do their own due diligence with announcing who they're going to. But there's going to be some recruiting news coming for UCF pretty soon. Everybody be safe and have a great day.